A prayer for this election season. God, promise keeper of the new creation, in this election season, guide us to be gospel-informed voters who stand on the side of justice and truth. As a community of conscience, we recognized our shared responsibility in righting the wrongs that dishonor and dehumanize the dignity of the most vulnerable among us. As a community of conscience, we acknowledge the harm that has been done to the environment and the urgency to work collectively to care for Earth, our common home. We see our country in turmoil, experiencing a time of chaos that not only impacts every person of this nation, but peoples from across the globe. As individuals and a faith community, we recognize that we bear both a privilege and a burden to vote our conscience and to make choices that will and do affect the future of everyone.
Members of the Justice, Peace, and Integrity for Creation Committee appreciate the positive feedback we received from sisters and companions in response to the Spring Values Voting webinar, which provided a history of voting in the United States and the importance of voting through the lenses of Catholic social teaching and Franciscan values. We indicated that we would prepare a second webinar addressing some key issues to be considered in the November elections. Again, we will not talk about specific candidates, but will focus on issues. Since that first webinar, a lot has happened on the national scene. There was an attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The Republican National Convention, in which Senator J.D. Vance was affirmed as the choice for vice president. The withdrawal of President Biden from the campaign and his endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris as the nominee. Affirmation of her candidacy by the Democratic delegates, her selection of Governor Tim Walz as vice president, and the Democratic National Convention. We now have access to the platforms of both major parties. Members of the JPIC committee will offer some current information on 4 major issues: gun violence, immigration, the economy, and climate crisis. There is not time to examine each one of these in great detail, but some factual highlights will be presented. And now, Sister Maria Orlandini will address the issue of gun violence.
The NRA has a saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. It is misleading and wrong. It is true, guns do not kill people, but people with guns kill people. Even if we do not live ourselves with violence realities in our own day-to-day lives, if we simply listen to the news, neighborhood shootings, suicide, drive-by shootings, murder, accident, gangs, and wars, gun violence touches our lives daily. Has our society become numb to deaths by gun? Every day in the United States, more than 120 people are killed with guns, and twice as many are wounded. The ripple effects of gun violence impact countless others. The American Public Health Association reports that gun violence is a leading cause of premature deaths in the United States. The Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence reports Americans are 26 times more likely to be shot and killed than others in high-income countries. While we recognize the complexity and political sensitivities of this issue, our congregational commitment to the gospel values of nonviolence, Catholic social teaching, and the dignity of the individual expressed in our corporate stand on gun violence, and to carefully learn all compel us to take further steps to mitigate gun violence and to carefully learn about where the candidates we wish to vote for stand on this important issue. There are several pieces of legislation that could help the crisis in our country. Is the candidate you are voting for in favor of, for example, background checks? They support rigorous background checks which help ensure the firearms are not sold to individuals with felony convictions, domestic violence restraining orders, or severe mental health issues. Extreme Risk Protection Order, or commonly known as red flag laws, supports red flags laws which allow loved ones or law enforcement to petition courts to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed to be a danger. Accountability of gun manufacturers. These laws endorses efforts to repeal the PLACA, or the Protection of Law Commerce in Arms Act, which would allow gun manufacturers to be sued for damage due to unsafe business practices. Assault weapon ban advocates for the prohibition of assault weapons and devices that modify firearms to function like assault weapons. Ghost guns oppose the availability of untraceable firearms assembled from parts that lack serial numbers, bypassing regulations. And finally, gun trafficking encourages legislation and enforcement to prohibit and intervene in illegal selling of firearms, both domestically and internationally. If you can say yes to any of this, or the candidate desires to change the crisis that gun violence is in our country, you may feel free, you may feel comfortable to give your vote. Now, Sister Domenica Bianco will address the issue of immigration.
The Sisters of St. Francis of Philadelphia took a corporate stand on immigration in 1996. Since then, while acknowledging that migrants have the right to remain in their native country, we have advocated for reform for our governmental system to humanely welcome refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants to our land of the free and home of the brave. This election is no different. In accord with our corporate stand, we are called to espouse rights for all asylum seekers and immigrants, and to work hard to combat the negative atmosphere frequently surrounding immigrants. DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, has been high on our list of reformation, as well as a secure border that allows entry for those seeking safety. We have also worked for more just and humane policies for our immigrants who plant our food and fuel our industries. While we wrestle with the complexities of our immigration system, it is important to remember the significant reasons that drive migrants to our borders. Many take on the dangerous journey from their homeland to the United States because their lives are in grave danger from corrupt governments, from gang violence, famine, and crippling unemployment. Yet misconceptions about immigrants are high. We list for you various myths and facts that dehumanize and misrepresent our brothers and sisters. One of the first myths: most immigrants are coming to the United States illegally. It's a fact. Regardless of someone's manner of entry, seeking asylum is a legal right. And more than that, it is a cornerstone of United States and international law. Each year, 10,000 people migrate to the United States via the Refugee Resettlement Program through work visas or other ways so that they can reunite with family to escape violence in their native country and more. Of those who come through the southern border, approximately 92% were apprehended or turned themselves into border control to begin their asylum cases. The other myth is that refugees and immigrants take American jobs. Well, it's a fact. With nearly 8.5 million unfilled jobs nationwide, and at a time of record low unemployment, immigrants are essential, absolutely essential, to filling in the gaps in the American workforce. Immigrants are also more likely to contribute to job creation than displacement, with more than 55% of the country's billion-dollar startups founded by immigrants. Another myth held by many is that refugees and immigrants don't pay taxes and are a drain on our nation's resources. Well, it's a fact. Refugees and asylees contribute significantly to United States communities at the federal, state, and local level, both economically and culturally. Refugees and asylees contributed an estimated $581 billion in revenue to the U.S. economy from 2005 to 2019. And in some cases, they pay into Social Security without reaping its benefits. Most importantly, they are our doctors and nurses, our well-known chefs, our favorite musicians, our overnight construction workers, our local shop owners, our neighbors, and so much more. Another myth is that refugees and immigrants are responsible for bringing drugs into the country. Well, it's a fact the vast majority of immigrants who cross the border immediately present themselves to authorities to seek asylum. There's virtually no reason for someone seeking asylum to simultaneously be attempting to smuggle in drugs, thereby threatening their asylum status. In 2022, United States citizens were 89% of convicted fentanyl drug traffickers, 12 times greater than convictions of illegal immigrants for the same offense. Another myth is that refugees and immigrants commit more crimes and make the country more dangerous. Well, it's a fact. Research has proven time and time again that there is no link between immigration and increased crime rates, and that immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated than their native-born peers. In fact, some studies show that increased immigration results in lower crime rates, meaning immigrants make the United States safer after all. Another myth is that most Americans don't support immigration or a path to citizenship for undocumented people. Well, despite that harsh rhetoric and extremism in the media and beyond, it is a fact. Most Americans support bipartisan solutions on immigration. What is ultimately needed and what is seldom discussed on the campaign trail is the reform of a U.S. immigration system that is severely outdated and ill-equipped for our modern economy. Sadly, what will likely not be talked about in any detail is the dire need for our elected officials, particularly Congress, to create more legal avenues for immigrant workers to fill crucial jobs. A broader reform also would include changes to the asylum system and longer-term policy solutions to alleviate the root causes of migration. At the border, for example, the only way migrants can legally enter is by using the CBP phone app, which is accessible to so many migrants. In the absence of federal legislation, pardon me, that app is not accessible. I beg your pardon. That app is not so accessible. In fact, it's rather inaccessible to so many migrants. And in the absence of federal legislation to improve the system, states are taking it in their own hands. So we had Texas busing migrants to Democrat cities like the terrible Operation Lone Star policy, the attacks on Catholic shelters like Annunciation House in El Paso and Catholic charities in the Rio Grande Valley. Human trafficking is linked also to forced migration, unaccompanied migrant children, and the lack of employment authorization for most asylum applications. Concerns about immigration are in fact a symptom of insecurities about the economy, particularly the cost of living and inflation, which remain too high for many U.S. families. Misleading reports and pictures from the border by certain media outlets, often labeled as depicting an, quote, invasion of immigrants, seem designed to capitalize on the economic fears of Americans, some of whom see immigrants as a threat to their jobs, economic well-being, and quality of life. What some American voters may not fully grasp, however, is that the U.S. economy needs immigrant labor for growth and to create jobs for U.S. citizens. Now, Sister Marie Lucy will address the economy.
The economy is a top issue for many in this election. Principle number 5 in Catholic social teaching states, the economy must serve the people, not the other way around. If the dignity of work is to be protected, then the basic rights of workers must be respected. The right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, to the organization and joining of unions. So let's take a look at economy. Economy is from the same root as ecology, eco, household, and deals with the management of the household. Simply put, an economy is how money is made and spent. The gross domestic product, GDP, is a measure of a country's economic activity over time. The 4 main components of GDP are consumption, household spending on goods and services, the demand side of the market, investment, storing income for future value, government spending for the welfare of the people, net exports, the difference between a country's exports and imports. Economy is not the same as the stock market, which has periodic rises and falls. Economy is not the same as inflation, though inflation can influence economy. According to economic experts, indicators are that the state of the U.S. economy in 2024 is strong. And as of August 14th, the inflation rate is 2.9%, which is lower than the long-term average of 3.28%. So, if the economy is strong and has recovered from COVID sooner than most comparable major economies, why is the economy an issue of major concern in the coming elections? Most families think of the economy in terms of cost of living, the amount needed to cover basic expenses like food, housing, healthcare, taxes. Cost of living is tied to wages. It is not the same as inflation, though inflation helps to determine cost of living. According to the Consumer Price Index, prices increased 3.2% between February 2023 and February 2024, which is actually a large decrease from the 9.1% peak in June 2022. Inflation is slowing, but some key household items still see elevated price increases. Between 2023 and 2024, according to the Economic Policy Institute, food prices rose 2.6%. However, just as of this week, that was now decreased down to 1% price increases. Energy prices decreased 4.6% but housing, shelter rose by 5.7%. Other items, including car insurance, rose 3.9%. Given the declining inflation rate, it is expected that the Federal Reserve will soon lower interest rates. And the hope is that the cost of living will decrease. Meantime, big corporations, including food manufacturers and pharmaceuticals, are making record profits. When we examine the platforms of the two major parties on economic issues, in light of Catholic social teachings, consider who benefits the most and who benefits the least. What are their respective tax policies? Which ensures a just living wage for all workers and the right to join a union? Which platform includes investment in affordable housing, affordable health care? Let's pause for a minute to think about that. Now, Sister Kathleen McCabe will address the climate crisis.
Climate change, one of the most pressing issues of our time, is largely driven by greenhouse gas emissions from burning fossil fuels. Current planetary health indicators show the year 2023 was the hottest year on record, and extreme weather events have increased in intensity and frequency and resulted in record-breaking heat waves, floods, and wildfires globally. The Global Living Planet Index shows an average 69% decrease in wildlife populations since 1970. Only about 15% of land and 7% of oceans are under some form of protection globally. Groundwater depletion has increased by 22% globally in the past decade. Over 2 billion people lack access to safely managed drinking water. 33% of marine fish stocks are being harvested at unsustainable levels. Microplastics have been found in 100% of marine turtles, 59% of whales, and 36% of seals examined. Finally, 99% of the world's population breathes air that exceeds the World Health Organization's air quality limits. Our corporate stand on care for creation and our Franciscan heritage committed us to ecological education of ourselves and others, leading to concrete actions, both individual and communal. With this in mind, we know our voting can make a difference and have an effect on how creation-friendly living is promoted now and into the future of our state and country. You are urged to learn about candidates and seek candidates who advocate for policies and practices that acknowledge and work to mitigate climate change. Ambitious targets for transitioning to renewable energy, which is currently at 29% globally. Concrete plans for phasing out fossil fuels and support for international climate cooperation. Sustainable land use practices that balance human needs with ecosystem health. Regenerative agricultural practices that improve soil health and sequester carbon. Support for small-scale and indigenous farmers who often use more sustainable methods. We'll pause now for a minute to think about all this.
We have spent time focusing on 4 important issues. But what has become clear is that apart from specific issues, the direction of this country is at stake. The political parties have different visions of what democracy should look like. As was said in the first webinar, no candidate fully represents Catholic social teachings and Franciscan values. In the same way, no one party represents these values. We believe that it is incumbent on each of us as voting citizens to be as fully informed as possible. We urge our sisters and companions to familiarize yourself with the platforms of each major party, as well as Project 2025, which you may have heard about recently. Discern which more closely aligns with Catholic social teaching and Franciscan values. In which direction should this country move forward? This webinar focused on elections at the national level, but the issues also have implications for state and local levels. So we encourage you to seek information about where your local candidates stand on the issues. All of these issues and others should be viewed in the larger context of how our U.S. democracy is strengthened and the direction our country will take in moving forward at this critical juncture in our history. We have spoken of many things tonight and know that the issues are complicated and the amount of information can be overwhelming. Let us support one another and continue to pray for our political leaders that they make choices that benefit the common good.
And now we conclude our time together with the second part of Sister Diana Ortiz's prayer. So let us pray. As we ready ourselves to go to the polls this November, may our time of discernment be rooted in the teachings of our faith and our common life together. May our faith guide us to vote for genuine servant leaders who, like Jesus, will welcome the stranger, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the prisoner, embrace the sick and dying, and promote peace and nonviolence. Send your Spirit to be with us as we cast votes for the common good. And regardless of the outcome of the elections, may we continue to work for a more just and sustainable world. May we always stand on the side of justice and truth. Amen.